Are you ready for phenomenal thought leadership from the most well-respected leaders in industry? Join us for stellar conversations and sound advice from trailblazers who have a passion for excellence. Learn best practices that will catapult the culture of your company into a new level of greatness. Welcome to Great Companies, Great Leaders. Your host is Christine Gannon.
Welcome to Great Companies, Great Leaders. I'm Christine Gannon, your host, and I am super honored and excited to have a guest today that is beyond inspirational. Can't wait for you to hear his story, all of the experiences that he's had, and impart some incredible wisdom. Welcome, Kevin Youngblood.
It is great to be with you.
Thank you. So a little bit about Kevin before we get started. He and his wife, Margie, have been married for 35 years. They have 3 grown children, and in the early years of their marriage, Kevin served our country in the military in Operation Desert Shield and Operation Desert Storm, thank you, where he earned 8 medals. He was the mayor of Carl, Georgia, which we haven't talked about. I really want to know about that. That's super interesting. And started and operated several businesses, the most recent being Odysseyware, Inc., which is an educational software company focused on reaching at-risk students. This company was founded in 2001 and sold to a venture capital fund in 2016 for over $100 million. For the last few years, Kevin's been investing in the Phoenix startup community by way of coaching and financial investment. He has served on the advisory board at ASU for Entrepreneurship, coaching MBA candidates as they pitch their ideas to investors. And most recently, he's been helping Grand Canyon University launch their Canyon Ventures program, which, for those of you that don't know, is an innovation center for startups in the city of Phoenix, where he serves as entrepreneur in residence. The goal with that center is to help these businesses grow from a napkin idea to sustainable revenue as quickly as possible. And through this process, Kevin realized that a lot of startup founders struggle with selling their ideas, selling their products, and getting to revenue. And to respond to that need, his solution was launching a new business called Youngblood Works, which we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about, which provides sales training and mentoring to startup founders and executives with the goal of preparing business leaders with knowledge, skills, and confidence to generate sustainable revenue. He also serves as chairman of Local First Arizona. We are thrilled to have you. Where are you zooming in from today?
I am zooming in from my downtown Phoenix apartment. I have a house on the south side of Phoenix, but it was taking me quite a bit of time to get back and forth to GCU. And so my wife and I decided to rent an apartment, and we've been down here for about 16 months, and we love it.
It's awesome. And for those of you who aren't in Arizona, our traffic is not Houston traffic, but it can be daunting and a lot of time spent on the freeway. So I get reducing that commute time. So we talked a little bit about your journey in the bio, but can you give us, from your perspective, where did you start your career and how did it lead you to where you're at today?
Yeah, great question. I grew up in Northeast Georgia. We can trace our family back to 1739 when our ancestors landed on these shores. I'd been told forever that the name Youngblood was an Indian name, Cherokee Indian, and I have a lot of Indian influence through the Arrowwood side of the family, but Youngblood is actually German, Youngblut. And
Wow.
so our folks settled in and around Appalachia, farm laborers. My grandfather, my dad's dad, 3rd grade education. My great-grandparents could not read, could not write it on the census documents. It has the X's in those boxes. But I grew to love education. My dad was the first person in our family to ever go to college, and so college became important. And so worked hard, became a teacher. And it was while being a teacher that I saw a problem with at-risk kids that launched me into Odysseyware and trying to use technology to solve that problem.
That is awesome. And then you saw a need at the Innovation Center, Canyon Ventures, and launched another company as well.
Absolutely. You know, in fact, I would talk a lot to the startup community or at ASU, and I would ask a question. All right, hey, raise your hand. How many of you guys like problems? And nobody raises their hand.
Surprising.
Surprising. And I'm like, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you got to look for problems. And if you solve a small problem, you get paid small. If you solve a big problem, you get paid big. And so for me, Odysseyware was trying to figure out, how do we help kids that are at risk of dropping out of school, customize technology to help them? And then when we sold the business in 2016, and actually before that, I started volunteering at ASU, the Center for Entrepreneurship, working with some of the smartest people from around the globe who were going into startups, or a lot of them, maybe they were going into corporate America. But at the end of the day, they're trying to solve problems. So my being a teacher, even though I don't have a business degree, I don't have a finance degree, I found really good traction there at the Center for Entrepreneurship in conversing with the professors and the students, because it was all focused on, what's the problem you're trying to solve? How are you going to solve it? How are you going to scale it? Where's your competition going to come from? And so you just start down that process, but it all comes around the problem. What is the problem?
So speaking of problem, we are coming out of hopefully this pandemic, which has been quite the curveball for most leaders. And many have had a difficult time pivoting, whether it's moving their team to work from home or having a hybrid environment. There's just been so many challenges. What advice would you give to leaders as they start to bring their teams out of COVID and back into some kind of an environment? What do you think is the most important thing for them to focus on?
Yeah, great question. For most of my lifetime, corporate America has said, we need you in the office. We're more creative when you're in the office. Be here, teamwork, all that stuff. And if nothing else, COVID disabused us of that. It's not perfect, but I'm telling you, people have been very creative. And now in the world of software, many of the enterprises that were inside the Innovation Center at GCU, they immediately went remote. There was no transition. There wasn't a week, 2 weeks, boom, overnight, they're going to a distributed model. Here's the advice. If I could offer one thing, it would be this: business is conducted through trust, and it's conducted through relationships.
So true.
And one of the challenges coming out of COVID is we're going to be so wired up and so focused and driven to make up ground or to push the new thing or to get footprint out there. I think we got to slow down just for a second and ask ourselves, what are we doing with our vendors, with our shareholders, with our board, with our teammates to build trust, because we haven't been able to really do life in the same way. And let's just make sure that we haven't overlooked that aspect of trust and relationships when we launch back out after COVID.
I think that's so important. You know, I'm reminded of that very old statistic that says communication, body language is 80% of communication. And that's been a bit of a challenge. Even though you and I see each other on Zoom, I can't necessarily read you as well as I might read your body language in person. And as a leader, I may not know, are you doing okay as an employee or as a colleague? Are you not, reading that. So I think that will be super important. I think that's a really good piece of advice.
I'll give you one quick thing, a quick story here. I've done a lot of Zooms as you have through COVID and everything. And there was a particular businessman that I'd had several Zoom calls with, and I felt we had a good connection and everything. He and I were finally able to meet for coffee. We both got vaccinated. I actually had COVID back in November, and so I had the antibodies, but I went ahead and got the vaccination. He and I were able to meet for coffee. And Christine, when he walked up, it was instinctively, we gave each other a hug. And the fact that we haven't been able to hug, but here's the crazy thing. This guy broke down crying. Here's a grown man, very accomplished leader, but he had not had that kind of physical interaction, just a hug from somebody that just says it's going to be okay. And I needed that as well. So
I think that's such important advice. I don't think we're talking enough about that. What does this look like? There's meetings that are starting to be planned to happen in person. And I know a recent meeting that I attended, people were uncertain about etiquette. Should I hand you a business card? Should I shake your hand? Should I hug you? Should I not? I think that's super important advice for leaders. Do you think, when you think about new entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurs that you coach and invest in, what do you think they miss when they start out? What are some things that are super important for them that they may miss in the excitement of launching something new?
Yeah, great question. There are three things I always look for in leaders, I look for in salespeople, and I look for in startup entrepreneurs. Three things. And there's a lot of other things I could add to it, but three core things. Because if they have these three, there's a great chance they're going to be successful in whatever they do in life. If they're missing one, two, or three of these things, they're going to really struggle. The first thing is they have to have a motor, which means they've got to have drive. You got to have something that gets you up out of bed in the morning, makes you overcome the necessary obstacles that you're going to face to be successful in whatever endeavor you choose to pursue. You got to have a motor. On another time, maybe if you want to, we can dig into. I've noticed there's two types of motors. There's a front wheel drive and a rear wheel drive, and it's crazy, but it does have an impact on the longevity of somebody's drive and motor. The second is they got to be coachable.
Mm,
If you don't have a steering wheel and a brake to go with it, and you're not coachable, you can have all the motor in the world, and all you're going to do is you're going to go off the cliff at a really very fast rate of speed. So you got to be coachable. The third thing is you got to have a moral compass. You
mm,
got to know right from wrong. If you don't know right from wrong, or you compromise your character values to try to cut the dog leg or get a deal done very quickly, it's going to come back to bite you. The one thing that I see in startups, I see a lot of people who have motors. They're driven. They're willing to work hard. And many of them have a moral compass. However, the one thing that is missing over and over and over in startup founders that I see is that coachability. Now,
mm.
that doesn't mean that I'm always right as the mentor or the investor, but listen, God gave us two ears and one mouth because he wants us to listen twice as much as we talk.
Right?
And so, and here's the beautiful thing, Christine, every time I'm with you, I learn something. Every time I interact with other leaders, I learn something. So if we're listening and if we're coachable, I
Sure.
think if you got those three things, you're really setting yourself up to be successful in life.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm thinking about those new entrepreneurs that you're coaching and investing in. And you're looking for those things, I imagine, in terms of, do they have these three qualities? What else do you think leaders absolutely have to have, and or what should they leave at the door besides their uncoachability? Like, they're sabotaging themselves sometimes without even knowing it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It takes so much of well, let's talk about ego just for a second.
Mm,
We tend to frame ego in a negative light. Oh, that person's got an ego. And you know what? Here's the fact. Look in the mirror and you're going to see an egotistical person. Every one of us have some measure of ego because it takes, you got to sell yourself and sell your ideas, and you got to get out there and you got to make stuff happen. However, the people that are successful in life are the ones that are able to moderate that based on data, based on feedback, based on conversations with people. So if there's one skill that I could add to this, I mentioned the three character traits that they all have. One skill that I think is in all great leaders is they become efficient at networking,
mm,
which is something you are extraordinary at, Christine.
thank
You
you.
know everybody in the valley and you're able to connect people and stuff. These young entrepreneurs, they need to work more on meeting people, not from a perspective of what can you do for me,
Right.
but from a perspective of what can I learn from you.
Super smart. Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about your newest company, Youngblood Works. Let's talk a little bit about that, because I think there you are doing some phenomenal work. You're providing pathways for college students in terms of a career and skill set and so many other things. But I'd love for you to share more about that with our audience. I think it's super important that people know, as well as entrepreneurs that are thinking about their newest venture. There's so much thought process and thought leadership that went into Youngblood Works. It wasn't just, hey, this is a solution to a problem. There are so many aspects of this that are healing, helping the community, that are providing career pathways, that are providing financial stability. I'd just love for you to share a little bit about that.
Well, thank you. This might be the most fun I've ever had. I mean,
Really?
literally, oh yeah, I'm having a blast. This is like, it's incredible. Real quickly, just to lay an overview of it and then tell you exactly the problem that we saw and why we set out to try to solve it. If you've got revenue, you actually have a business. I was in a meeting one time, and the dean of one of the larger universities in our state, dean of the business school, was asking everybody around the table, what do we need to be teaching students for the workforce? And the finance person raised their hand and said, you got to be teaching them macroeconomics. You got to be teaching them cap tables. You got to be teaching them how to pitch stuff. They went to the accountant and he said, you got to know the difference between debits and credits. They went to the marketing person. They said, you got to teach them search engine optimization, everything else. I was real quiet, which is unusual for me. But they came around to me and Mr. Youngblood, you've had a successful exit of a business, substantial number. What do you think we're missing? And I said, give me a young lady who doesn't know the first thing about search engine optimization. She doesn't know the difference between a debit and a credit. She has no idea about lean launch theory. She knows nothing about business model canvas.
Right.
But if she has revenue, she actually has a business. Whereas if somebody else has all these other things and they don't have revenue, all they have is a class project. And it was kind of quiet there for a second. But finally everybody said, oh yeah, that's what we meant. Yeah, we assumed revenue.
Of course.
When COVID happened, we realized that the 32 businesses inside the Innovation Center, if we don't get them into revenue quickly and grow that revenue, they're going to die. COVID is just going to be too cataclysmic of an event. They can pivot to work from home. They can do a lot of things, continue to build, but if they don't get revenue, when you can't get out and talk to customers,
right,
it's going to be. So we said, we got to do something strategic here. And the Robert Vera, who's the director of the Innovation Center there, he works for GCU. I tell people I'm sort of the Robin to his Batman. He looks out after the facility and all the processes and puts it in place, and I'm the coach. So he came to me and he said, man, you got to build an inside sales team. You've done this before, but you got to do it again because we've got to control the conversation. So we started in June of last year with 3 recent GCU graduates who came out of the business school. And we went out and got contracts with some startups to start driving top of funnel conversations and teeing up sales appointments and qualifying those. It quickly pivoted, Christine, however, into cybersecurity for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
And between June the 1st and today, we've got 82 customers.
Wow.
And some of them are the largest cybersecurity firms in the world. And these students, as well as some professional salespeople that we've had and known in the past, we've put together a bullpen of 18 people, and they are driving these conversations. We can quantify between June the 1st of last year till today, they have added over $20 million to the top of funnels for these cybersecurity firms. That's
Congratulations.
massive. In the middle of COVID.
In the middle of COVID.
So I told Robert, I said, so one of these days, somebody's going to do a case study that here's a business we started in the middle of COVID.
Right.
And we started with a sales team without a product to sell.
Exactly.
It sounds backwards, but you know what? I actually think it's going to prove to be a very unique and interesting thing, and it's going to make a lot of difference.
You're changing lives, and this is a legacy for these students. I know you said you have some professional salespeople, but the students and the graduates that are learning this skill set, they can take it into any career.
That's right.
These are transferable skills that they can lead their own company with, they can lead a team with inside an organization, they can lead their family with. So I think you're leaving a tremendous legacy with that organization. So I applaud you for starting that, for taking the risk, and the success is amazing.
Well, thank you. Yeah, they're doing incredible. So this year, 2021, our first full year, they're going to do $3.5 million of revenue this year.
Wow. Fantastic.
And I get to do life with these kids every day, and I get to see what they're doing, and I'm like grandpa, and we get to interact. And so, yeah, a lot of fun.
So leaders, born or made?
Made.
Made.
There are some people who, obviously there are people who have natural born. You take most firstborn kids. You throw them into a situation and they, or maybe it's the second born kid who respond, whatever, but they tend to have some natural things. But leadership is made, and I'll tell you why. Because the biggest part of leadership is in serving.
Mm.
It's in listening. What is the question behind the question? What is the statement behind the statement? And that's a skill. And that's something that everybody can learn.
Very true. Takes the ego. You have to take the ego out of it. Back to your earlier point, being coachable and taking that ego and putting it aside to be a servant leader, truly.
That's right. That's exactly right. Exactly right.
Okay, last couple of questions for you. Best advice you've ever been given?
Do tough stuff. Do tough stuff. A lot of people will try to go into life. What's the easiest way I can? What's the easiest way for me to get on this team? What's the easiest way for me to get a job here? Do tough stuff. Even if it doesn't make sense on the resume, do tough stuff. I look back on life, and it was the teachers and coaches that influenced me to teach and coach. It was my time in the Marine Corps of doing one of the toughest things I'd ever done, in building a business and launching an education trust. Do tough stuff.
Awesome. Very good. Great advice. And what are you reading? What's on your nightstand?
Let's see. I'm reading May You Drink from the Saucer by Jack Arbour. And he's a writer out of Maine. And he was in town a couple of weeks ago. Very good. Interesting you asked me the question. I don't have a higher education. I mean, I've got a 4-year degree, but I don't have a master's or doctorate. So I've tried to make up for it through life by reading. And so I've read 2 books a month for 40 years now.
Wow. Okay. That right there, that nugget right there is amazing, because for people listening that are feeling inferior or inadequate because they don't have a master's degree or a doctorate, and you work in higher education all the time, so you know the pressure that's put on to have those degrees. And while they bring an amazing level of credibility, I think equally as much, to your point, we need to impress upon our students and the next generation that there are other ways to attain that wisdom and knowledge without having those. There's benefit to both.
You can borrow brains, but you can't borrow character.
Oh, so true.
And brains is through somebody's story. Read their book. They'll tell you everything you want to know. So I read a lot of biographies. I read a lot of how do people think. So
what's your favorite one?
There was a book that came out about stealing Lincoln's body. Stealing Lincoln's body. Incredible story. Most people don't even know it happened on election night, 1876, when one of the most contested elections in American history. You got to read it. Great book.
Awesome. Where can people find you if they're interested in Youngblood works, or they're interested in anything that you're working on? How can they find you?
Yeah. Go to Local First Arizona or to the Innovation Center at Grand Canyon University. It'll tell you all about it. Physically, I'm either downtown, meeting in the coffee shops with different leaders, or I'm out at Grand Canyon University, meeting with individual founders, having conversations with them every day. How are you doing? What's holding you up? What do you need? What's the next thing? Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin, for being on today, for all the wisdom that you imparted. Thank you for your mentorship all the time and all that you're doing in our community and beyond. You're leaving a tremendous legacy. So thank you.
Thank you for having me, my friend.
Brightworks Consulting hosts this podcast and YouTube channel to spotlight the leadership around the world that is changing lives. Brightworks offers a myriad of consulting services in the public and private sector, to include diversity, equity, and inclusion solutions for any size company. You can find us at www.brightworksconsulting.com. We're honored to have Best Companies AZ as a presenting sponsor for this podcast. Best Companies AZ is your #1 source for regional employer branding. You can find them at www.bestcompaniesaz.com.